Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Chris here. So today I thought I would dive into the depths of Pro Tools. Let's go. Okay, so just a quick disclaimer. I've been putting off this video for a bit because I know Pro Tools is quite a tedious bit of software to get your head around, but you know, it is the industry standard for a reason. So I figured I'll try make it as easy as possible to kind of understand the general workflow, at least enough to get you rolling in Pro Tools. So I've got the software here. Let's take a quick look. So you've opened up Pro Tools, you've created your first project, and this is what you're greeted with, a pretty blank screen. So just to quickly work you through it, I'm just going to break down what you see on the screen, get us started from there, and then I'll get into creating tracks and actually getting some audio out of this. So let's go. So at the top here, you can see a combination of things. I'm just going to start from the right because it makes the most sense to me. On the right over here, you've got your tempo, your grid section. This is where you would set your BPM. You've got your metronome on and off button there, as well as you can set your click track settings if you double click it. Yo, how good. I've always wanted to do one of these edits. So I completely forgot, and I noticed whilst I was editing this, that if you want to actually hear the metronome, you have to create a click track. And to do that, you go into track, create new click track, and voila, you're in. You've got it as a track. Sweet, let's go. As well, you've got your count in button if you want to count in before you start recording and how many bars, you can set it there. If you can't see this, you just right click on the window and that is your MIDI controls. That's over there. So as well as with everything else, if you can't see something, you can just turn it on from here. Also to the right of this, you've got your meter. So that's just a tiny little meter that will give you your overall volume on the song you're working on. So next to that, you've got your transport controls, your play, stop, record, your scrub, all of that stuff. That's pretty self-explanatory, but I mean, if you want to know a quick tip on recording that I take from my Logic days, is that if you right click on record, you can set this to a couple different variations. I like it set on quick punch, so if I'm playing the song and I press record, it will just start recording, which isn't really the default of Pro Tools, so I like to have it set like that. That's a personal thing. You can do whatever. Again, another personal thing, I like to have the play button set to loop. So if I have a selection, it will just loop that selection. If I turn it off, it will just play through it once and that's fine. So the next section is the grid and nudge section. This is where you would set the grid of your project. So if I wanted to display in quarter notes or in 8 notes, I can do that here. And the nudge is simply the value of how much you would like to nudge your selector tool. So in this case, I've got it set to 132 notes. So it's going to be shuffling across in 132, depending on what your BPM is. So the shortcut to nudge is just comma and full stop, and that will kind of nudge you across. Now I'm going to be getting into a lot of these shortcuts and commands because if you really want to get the most use out of Pro Tools and the least frustration, you should really learn the shortcuts because it will speed up your workflow 100 times over. Okay, so moving on from that, we've got the counter section. This will display your meter, you know, so if I want, I could change this to a time counter, or I could even add a sub counter to have, say, my beats and bars, and then on the bottom one I could have my minutes and seconds. We'll display both of them, which is great. And then beside that, in this section, that's basically showing me if I make a loop, it will give me all the details of the length and the placement of that, as well as where the playback head is located. So that's great. Underneath, it just shows you where your cursor is located, as well as a value of, in this case, it's samples, but say I change this to automation, it will give me the volume. Followed by that on the right, you just kind of have your status of, like, say, solo or mute. So if I click on this, it will show me if a track is soloed or muted, similar to how you would find on a console. Just a warning letting you know that, you know, something's going on in your project that you should be aware of. Okay, now to the left of that, we have all of the tools. Very important. These are all the tools that if you're going to be mixing or tweaking regions, you're going to need access to. So starting on this top section here, you've got your magnify, your trim, your selector, your grabber, your scrub, and your pencil tool, right? And as you can see, 3 of the tools have this bar on top that allows you to use all of them at once. So what does that mean? So say I've got a track here, just a kick. If I had one of these tools selected, it would allow me to do just the one option, you know, whether that's trim or select or grab. I can do any of those if I had individually selected. If I click on this, it's kind of a combo. It allows me to do all 3 of those in one smart feature. So the region then gets divided into these different sections, right? So if I grab at the bottom, that allows me to move it. If I grab on the sides, that allows me to trim. And if I grab on the top half, that allows me to select. So I can, you know, do all my trimming and all of that stuff from there. As well as if I grab the top corners, it allows me to add fades. So as you can see with the combo of all of them, again, it can be a really quick workflow. So zoom, you're pretty aware of what that does. Zooms in. If you don't want to use a tool, you can just press R and T. Those are kind of your quick zoom in and out tools. Or you can press 1 to 5 on your keyboard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like different extremes of zooms. Your trim tool can actually break out into a couple different options. That's kind of going a bit deep, so I'm just going to leave it for now, but we'll get into it in another video. Again, as well on the grabber tool, you've got some other options if you want to change it up. The scrub tool simply allows you to scrub through your audio, which is fine if you want to listen to it quickly. And the pencil tool is mainly for things like automation. You know, say I wanted to draw in a automation for volume, I could do that. Or if I click and hold, it gives me all the different options to kind of make my life a bit easier, which is great. So these tools at the bottom, I wouldn't say you need to worry about all of them, but in particular, this one here, which is the insertion follows playback, that just simply means how Pro Tools runs by default is that you press play, and then when you stop, plays from the same place where you've placed it, right? That's a lot of places. So it just starts the playback from the same place every time. But if you're playing through your song and you find yourself stopping and starting, but you want to continue playing through the song, if you just press N, that will just turn on that insertion follows playback button. And every time you stop the playback, it will continue progressing through the song. So these two beside it, that's just basically to link your edit and your timeline selection tool. So in Pro Tools, you can have 2 sets of playheads, which basically allows you to kind of edit, but then play from the same place. Personally, I would just leave these on, let everything happen together, save yourself any faff. And so moving on from there, the last thing I would worry about is this, which is tab to transient. That just basically means if you press tab, it will shoot the playhead to the first region you've got in line. Or say you have an audio track that's very percussive, say something like this, you could press tab and it will send the playhead to each transient, which is very convenient for editing. Also, if you quickly want to snap through your tools, you can press command and then 1 to 7, and that will quickly allow you to select any of the tools you need. Okay, so moving on, then we've just got these zoom controls. This is the height of your waveform, so it's not actually changing the volume, just how clearly it's displayed in Pro Tools. You've got the same thing for your MIDI, don't really have that right now. And then underneath are just those 5 zoom presets. Okay, now to the left of that, this is the last bit of the boring section, I guess. You've got your snapping tool, right? This will be for your cursor. So as you can see, I've got it set to slip. That just means it's not quantized. It's just no, there's no snapping. Beside that, you've got your grid. This will snap depending on the division you've got set in this grid section. Followed by that is shuffle. So this is interesting. Say I'm working on a song and I want to chop out the whole chorus, but after the chorus, I've got another verse or whatever. I've got the whole rest of the song and I want to scoot that over. With the shuffle tool, if I have that selected and I press delete, it will move everything over. Even if you have automation, everything, it's just gonna shuffle it over. Okay, and then lastly, spot. Basically, if I click a region, it will say, where do you want this region? And I'm gonna say bar 16, and I press OK, and that kick will perfectly be placed on bar 16. Fantastic. And just another shortcut, if you press this kind of sideways comma with the squiggly next to your Z key, kind of looks like this, that will just shift through the snapping modes for you. Again, saving you a bit of time. Okay, now that we've gotten through that fun, let's create some tracks. So to create a track, you can either go into your track and then create a new track. It's a bit long, so I'm just going to do Command-Shift-N. So again, the beauty of Pro Tools with its shortcuts, say I needed to make 8 audio tracks, 2 instrument tracks, a couple of auxiliaries, and maybe a master, I can do that all from this one menu. So as you can see, I've got the audio track, I need 8. I need them to be stereo, so if I press Command and right, that will make it stereo. Left and right will change the amount of channels that it has. Then if I press Command, Shift and down, Boom, that will give us another layer of tracks to make. So I want 2 instrument tracks. So if I press Command and down, change that to instrument tracks. I want them stereo. And then maybe, 2 auxiliaries. For the sake of it, 1 master fader in stereo. Boom. It's created all of that, saved me a bit of time, fantastic. So you've created your audio track you want to record. Oh my god, you haven't assigned an input. So you go over to here in your IO. If you can't see this, you can right click up here. It will give you a bunch of extra things to look at. But you can click in your IO section as your input, select your input, and boom, you're in. Underneath that is your output. This is usually set to your speakers by default, but if it isn't, well, we can troubleshoot that at the end. Okay, so I've got the track, I can press record. As you can see, my signal is coming through nice and healthy. That's great. If I want to listen to myself, I could put that on. I'm already listening to myself, so I don't need to. And then you've got your solo and mute buttons. Now, if you want to create an instrument track, a MIDI track, most people would assume you would click on MIDI track, but that's more for using a controller. So in this case, we'll go onto the instrument track, get it on stereo, plop that in. And then if you go into your plugins, you can see your instruments all here. Fantastic. So those are your tracks. Now let's go into the mixer section. So you press Command equals, gets you into the mixer. Fantastic. In the mixer, we can see some similar things that we had on the tracks, like our inserts and our sends. If you right click on here, you can probably add a couple more that aren't being shown right now. Say you want to add a plugin, you can just click in your insert, go to plugin. Now, most people will only be seeing this, right? So say you want to also see the manufacturers that create the plugins. If you go into your preferences and then into your display, over here, organize plugins by menu, you can set it to category and manufacturer, and that will give you all of the options. As well, while you're in there, you might want to consider going into the mixing section, and here you can set a default EQ and compressor. Say you have one plugin in particular that you use all the time, you can just set that up so when you go into your inserts, they're the first 2 plugins that you see. Great. Okay, so you've got your instrument track, you've placed an instrument in there, you've realized no sound is coming out of your MIDI keyboard, just hit record. Fantastic. Okay, so just to kind of top it off, I'm going to end here with some troubleshooting because it always happens. You open Pro Tools or whatever, you open your DAW and you get stuck on God knows what. So I'm just going to show you a couple of the places where I tripped up when I was getting into Pro Tools for the first time. So you've got no sound coming out of Pro Tools. What do? You go in Setup, go to your playback engine. This is basically where you can select your audio interface, your buffer size, all of that good stuff. If you're still not getting any sound, I would go into, again, Setup, into your I/O. This is where all of your I/O lives and you can rename it, turn it on and off. Just make sure you go in each page and press default. That will just make sure that you're setting yourself off to a good place to start where your interface and Pro Tools just kind of sort themselves out. No MIDI instruments. So if you create an instrument track, again, just to make the difference between a MIDI track and an instrument track, you can see here, can't put any plugins, but you can select MIDI devices. And here you can put plugins and select audio outputs. But you go to select an instrument and you realize half of your instruments are missing. You're like, what's going on? Just bear in mind that when you create an instrument track, you just want to make sure it's in stereo, because having a mono MIDI instrument track is a bit less likely. So that is usually the fix to that. How do I press record? I'm pressing R and all it's doing is zooming out. To press record is just number 3 on your numpad. Now, most people don't really have this, so if you don't have this, you're just gonna have to press record and press space like everyone else. You recorded a great piece of MIDI and you didn't press record. It's okay. You can go into your event, retrospective record, or Alt-Shift-Z, and that will give you a MIDI. Doesn't work with audio, but we're not that far into the future yet. Don't know, my zoom in and out and some of my keyboard shortcuts aren't working. What's going on? Just bear in mind you got this tiny little tick box right there, that AZ, that just allows your shortcuts on the keyboard to work. So just make sure you have that activated if you want to use them. So I know this is a very boring video, but at the end of the day, everyone needs to get started somewhere. If you enjoyed this, you can let us know below. and maybe I'll make a more advanced tutorial, kind of getting into all the nitty-gritty that you can do with Pro Tools, because it's a fantastic program. But at the end of the day, this is a video for getting started, just getting off your feet, and hopefully I've helped make that process a bit smoother for you. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'll happily answer them. And thanks again for watching. I've been Vella. I'll see you on the next one.